When Acura relaunched the Integra name, not everybody was thrilled. Some people laughed, some people made fun of Acura, because of course the Integra shares a great deal with the humble Honda Civic. Of course, the humble Honda Civic Type R as well. But it turns out Acura is the one laughing. All the way to the bank, that is, because the Integra is far and away the best seller in the segment. Whether you're looking for one of the best values in this segment, one of the biggest interiors, the biggest trunks, or some of the best performance numbers, you should definitely consider putting the Integra on your shopping list. Today we're taking a look at a 2024 Type S, but in this video I'm going to be talking about the entire Integra lineup because there is just one little problem with the Type S for some shoppers. It's not available with an automatic transmission at all. In fact, the Integra is the only entry in this segment to offer not one but two different models with manual transmissions. Nobody else offers a manual, but unfortunately, Acura does not offer an automatic with the high horsepower engine. So keep that in mind as we continue. Acura doesn't just outsell the competition, they practically destroy the competition. Acura sold almost 3 times the number of Integras last year as Audi sold A3s in the United States. And I think it's actually pretty easy to see why. Not only is the Integra honestly more exciting looking than the A3, although I do like the elegant simplicity of the Audi's design, it also is considerably less expensive, and we get a ton of standard feature content in the Integra. This starts $4,000 less than the A3, $7,000 less than the BMW 228i, a whopping $12,000 less expensive than the least expensive Mercedes-Benz CLA, and even $6,000 less expensive than the competitive Lexus UX. Yeah, the UX is not a sedan, but it's here in the entry-level segment. And even though it is a hybrid, you're probably not going to save $6,000 worth of fuel in the average ownership cycle. Then again, I think there is the looks. The Integra definitely looks the part, and for me, I think is one of the better looking Acuras around. I think one of the other big reasons the Integra outsells the competition is, well, it's bigger than the competition. This is about 10 inches longer than the Audi A3, a decent amount longer than the BMW, and still an inch longer than the Mercedes-Benz CLA, even though that is quite long for this segment. It is going to be a little bit more difficult to fit in tight parking situations than the Lexus UX, but the interior is arguably more practical than that Lexus. This is also the only Sportback left in this segment. It's not a sedan like the Audi, the BMW, and the Mercedes, and that significantly improves rear cargo practicality. Since this is the raciest Integra, we get a carbon fiber spoiler on top of the hatch lid and a revised lower bumper with aero fins and that signature triple exhaust in the middle. Sort of an homage to Integras of the past, we have Integra stamped into the rear bumper, and then of course, big LED taillights. The Type S is more than just bumper tweaks and a triple exhaust. We also get revised front fenders. These are significantly wider than on the regular Integra. Up front, they're sheet metal. In the back, they are plastic add-ons. But they're here because of the tires. We have two 65/30 ZR19s on this Integra Type S. That's a really low-profile tire and surprisingly wide. In fact, these are actually some of the widest tires in this segment. We also get absolutely massive front brakes. And that's what helped this Type S stop from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in just 100 feet, even though, as you can see, it's pretty wet out here. If you're new to the luxury segment, this next part might surprise you. The Integra offers a ton of active driver assistance tech standard that is optional on most of the competition, especially the European competition. Adaptive cruise control, lane centering and lane keeping, autonomous emergency braking with pedestrian detection, blind spot monitoring, cross-traffic detection, and auto high beams are standard on every Integra. And the adaptive cruise control works with the manual transmission as well. There are a few optional systems like the park sensors and the rain sensor. Those are optional, but pretty much everything else is standard. And for the most part, on the European competition, most of that is optional. The Lexus UX, that's really the only direct competitor to this that offers a competitive level of standard driver assist tech. The Integra's drivetrain choices have been a bit controversial in some circles, but let's talk about what's not controversial first. The fact that they've been borrowed out of the Honda Civic. And I think that's not controversial because of which Civics they borrowed from. This engine has been borrowed from the Civic Type R. The base engine has been borrowed from a Civic Si. That base 1.5-liter turbo gives you 200 horsepower, 192 pound-feet of torque. This one bumps things all the way through the roof to 320 horsepower, 310 pound-feet of torque. It's not the most powerful entry in this segment, but you do get a lot of power for a much lower sticker price than, say, a CLA 45 AMG. Also not controversial, the manual transmissions. Acura not only gives you a manual on this 2-liter turbo, it's also available on the 1.5-liter turbo. Nobody else in this segment offers a manual at all, and Acura offers you two. Unfortunately, Acura also gives you a continuously variable automatic transmission on the base engine, and that has been a little bit controversial. Yes, it is my favorite CVT in North America, but it's still not as engaging as a traditional automatic or a dual clutch transmission would be. Also, no automatic at all on the 2-liter turbo. If you can't row your own, you can't get the Type S. The last thing that's a bit unusual, no all-wheel drive option is available on the Integra. It appears this platform wasn't designed for it. We also don't find it on the related Honda products. That is a bit more of a bummer, because you will get all-wheel drive on essentially all of the competition. If you're torn between an Integra Type S and a Civic Type R, and I can completely understand why you would be, know that the seats in the Type S are not the same. These are sportier than the rest of the Integra lineup, but they're a little bit less hardcore than the ones that we find in the Type R, and honestly, more my preference as a result. We have a 4-way adjustable lumbar support, bolstering that is a little bit lower and a little bit wider as well, so taller drivers or larger drivers should have an easier time finding a good driving position here. We still have a tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion and plenty of headroom because this model does not have a moonroof. Where the Integra really shines against the competition is legroom. With this front seat comfortably adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, you can see I have several inches of legroom left. This is one of the few vehicles in this segment where you could actually put a rear-facing child seat, not some of those larger seats, but some of the smaller ones behind a 6-foot-tall driver. That would not really be possible in an A3 or a CLA or a 2 Series. They're just too small. This front seat is all the way back in its tracks and actually a little bit more reclined than I would normally sit in. As you can see, there's still some legroom left there. One thing that's not left, however, is a 5th seat. We get just cup holders right here in the middle and no fold-down armrest. Rear seat headroom is the one area where the Integra really disappoints, and that's because of this big hinge for that hatchback there. I'm sitting quite far forward. As you can see from this angle, my head is touching the ceiling and I'm nowhere near that head restraint. I'm also not necessarily that close to the hinge itself. Really, you're gonna end up sitting back here with your head resting on the ceiling. I also think the lack of a fold-down armrest is an odd decision, although perhaps they wanted to make sure that you really knew this was not a seat. No seat belt right there, 2 cup holders in the place where that seat might otherwise go. Also kind of an odd decision, no air vents for the rear passengers. That is the weirdest thing of all, actually, because you will find rear air vents in basically all the competition. Cargo capacity and cargo practicality are 2 big wins for the Integra thanks to this sportback or liftback design, whatever you want to call it. Not only does it make loading cargo a lot easier, it gives you a trunk that's about double the average in this segment. And if you, say, wanted to go get a barbecue at Home Depot, you could fit it in here. Good luck doing that in an A3. Also handy, the cargo area is very square and very deep. That's how we were able to squeeze 4 24-inch roller bags back here. That's definitely best in the segment. Unfortunately, Acura doesn't give us a practical way to use the storage space under the load floor. You can see there's this big foam divider under here, and they could have made this enormous trunk even bigger if they'd given us some sort of cargo divider module under there. Going for a quick spin around the interior of the Integra, we find some speakers up here on the ceiling because this does have the available ELS Studio 3D audio system. Height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, and a combination of imitation suede and leather upholstery in this Type S trim. I really like the fact that Acura is giving us this red leather interior because a lot of companies, especially the European companies, have such boring interior color options, but Acura certainly seems dedicated to the red interior. We have soft touch injection molded upper sections of the doors, those matching upholstery inserts right there in red, and then harder plastic down there towards the bottom of the door. Moving over to the dashboard, things do feel a little bit less premium than some of the competition, especially if you get the base models where we find a much smaller LCD than this. It's about 7 inches in the base trim. You get this 9-inch up-level system if you get the upper end trims. We have some physical buttons up over here that take us to the infotainment system. Basically the same software that we find in the Honda Civic. I don't particularly find that to be a problem. We also have air vents that are a little bit too Honda Civic-y, however, for me. That's the one thing I would say, is that the climate control systems and these vents are just a little bit too similar to the Civic. Down here we find USB inputs for that infotainment system, and then of course the manual transmission shifter, with reverse exactly where it belongs, over there to the right and then down. Over here we have the drive mode buttons, drive mode toggle, and then a button for the individual drive mode, electric parking brake and auto brake hold, then 2 big cup holders right in the middle. And then we have a small storage area with this kind of, I don't know, sort of industrial toilet seat motif going on there. I do think that's a little bit unusual, but it gives you that soft touch area while also still having the two big cup holders in a relatively short console that also still has to have a manual transmission shifter. And when you take a look at a lot of the European competition, the way they give you more storage space is because they have tiny shifters and they don't need to accommodate that larger shifter. Over on the driver's side, we do find a heads-up display. Acura says it's a 5.3-inch LCD, so a little bit on the small side, but not on the small side is this large LCD instrument cluster. It's not quite as large as some, but for this particular luxury segment, it actually is pretty average in terms of size. One surprise though, it doesn't have any software changes since the Integra first launched. So you notice we have the LED gauges over here on each side of this big screen, and you can change the look slightly, but you're never going to get a moving map display or anything like that. The steering wheel features a round design, sport grips up top. It's not overly thick as far as the rim diameter goes, so if you don't like thick steering wheels, you might like this one. Over here on this side, we find the controls for the standard adaptive cruise control system, and then on the left side of the steering wheel, we find the infotainment controls. Before we get out on the road, I should go back to the tires for just one moment. You can get 17, 18, or 19-inch wheels and tires on your Integra, but the base model, it's going to have significantly smaller tires, just 215s. Those are on the small side for the segment. However, most Integras are going to have 235s, which are fairly average given the curb weight and the general size of the Integra, but the Type S, these are enormous. Again, 265 width summer tires standard on the Type S. So as we roll through the numbers, keep that part in mind. Get the Integra Type S out on the road and you're instantly going to notice the power and you're going to notice the lack of all-wheel drive. I am of two minds on this because I think that the front-wheel drive nature is in some ways a bit more fun than the competition, but it's not necessarily going to be as easy to drive. There's obviously some value in that, however, as well. 0 to 60 in this model, 5.3 seconds. Keep in mind it is somewhat moist outside. It has been raining all week long, and I didn't really want to roast the clutch. If you were really aggressive on the shifts and you were a really skilled manual transmission driver, you might be able to get closer to 5.1 or maybe even 5 seconds even. But most folks are really going to be around this 5.3 to 5.5 second 0 to 60 time. It is going to be significantly slower if you get the 1.5 liter turbo, of course. 7 seconds in the CVT model, perhaps a little bit quicker, perhaps a little bit slower with the manual, depending on the kind of manual transmission driver you are. But we should talk more about the all-wheel drive. Part of me really loves the fact that you have to pay more attention with the Type S, especially. A little bit less attention, of course, with the 1.5 liter turbo. This is not the kind of vehicle where you can just crank the steering wheel, floor it, drop the clutch, and not expect a lot of drama. There's going to be drama because you have 300 horsepower, over 300 horsepower, and over 300 pound-feet of torque just on the front axle. Front axle hop actually is kept to a minimum, but even on this surface here, if I try and floor it, you have to really back off the throttle because it just starts sliding towards the edge of the road. There's just so much power that even these 265 with tires are not going to be able to keep it in check, especially on poorer paved road surfaces or inclement weather, etc. If you want the security of all-wheel drive, that ability to just crank the wheel and floor it without thinking, then you want some of the competition. Something like an Audi S3 or an RS3, they really do have that ability to just point it in a direction, floor it, and go. It's practically psychic. On the other hand, it's also a bit video game-like, and that's not exactly how I would describe the Type S here. Maybe I'm unusual in that I value rear-wheel drive driving dynamics, but I also find torque steer to be a hoot and a half. This definitely is that hoot and a half, but it also, again, requires a lot more attention and care while driving. Again, I think that's actually an asset, however. As far as the 60 to 0 stopping distance, also fantastic. 99 feet in this model, even though the roads were very, very wet when we were testing. I suspect on drier road surfaces, this might get down closer to 90 feet, which is practically stopping on a dime. Part of that is, of course, because we don't have all-wheel drive, and there's going to be extra weight involved in all-wheel drive, etc., and that is going to end up stretching your stopping distance out in some of the competition. But the big reason here, of course, is those absolutely massive brakes and massive tires that we have on this model. Given the road conditions, I can't demo the handling abilities of the Type S quite as well as I might want to, but we can talk about what you get in the various Integras. There are, depending on how you want to look at it, 3 or 4 different suspensions available. There are 3 different anti-roll bars, 3 different steering ratios, and you can get the A spec with or without the adaptive dampers. Then we have the suspension over here in the Type S. So lots and lots of variation, and that is possible because of the high sales volume in the Integra. The laziest steering, the softest suspension, etc., that's going to be found in the base model. A spec tightens things up, and then of course Type S tightens things up even further. But what's always interested me about the Type S and about the Integra is that this is still very daily driver livable. Acura realizes that even though the price tag on this is over $50,000, the kind of shopper that's interested in this is driving this to work every day. They're driving this to wherever they drive on the weekend. As a result of the Integra's daily driver mission, ride quality is solid even in this Type S model. I can dial this down to comfort, get a more comfortable ride. It's still on the firm side of things, but it's definitely easy to drive on poorly paved road surfaces, whether we're talking about this road or some of the gravel roads that I was on earlier today. And if I wanted to firm things up, I can go all the way up to Sport Plus, but Sport Plus is not going to be as firm as the Civic Type R. Remember, this is not an Integra Type R, it's an Integra Type S, and the personality is intended to be ever so slightly different. When it comes to ride quality in this segment, I'm going to give the Integra an A, regardless of exactly which comparison you're making, because the sportier versions of the European competition, they're going to be a little bit less compliant than this, and I think a little bit less daily driver livable, and the base models are certainly going to be a bit more comfortable in the Acura lineup. Where this unfortunately really differs from the competition in a bad way is cabin noise. I measured 73 decibels in here. Part of that is probably the wide tires, but part of it's also we just don't find as much sound deadening in here. So we get more road noise, more wind noise than we find in the competition, and definitely a decent amount more than we find in the competition as well. So when it comes to cabin noise, I'm going to give this a C-. This is substantially similar to the average mainstream compact sedan than the average luxury compact or subcompact sedan, and I do find that a tiny bit disappointing. Clearly that would have added curb weight, and maybe that would be a problem with the Type S as far as performance, but I'd be willing to give up 1/10 of a second to have a quieter cabin. On the plus side, fuel economy is fantastic. Even though this has a manual transmission, and manual transmissions are generally speaking less efficient than modern autos, we've been averaging 23 miles per gallon over a week of mixed driving, and that's right in line with the EPA says you should get. Clearly, you will get better fuel economy in the Lexus UX. That has a hybrid system, of course, and that's why I'm going to give this a B. I don't expect anybody to cross-shop Type S with UX, but in this segment, there are going to be slightly more fuel-efficient options if you're looking at that base 1.5-liter turbo. If we're simply talking Type S to competitive vehicles in the performance segment, then this would go up to an A, because it is a little bit more fuel-efficient than the higher performance options from the Germans. However, that's mainly because we don't find all-wheel drive here. If you live in a fair weather state, the lack of all-wheel drive is probably not going to be too big of a deal. However, if you live in an area that gets a lot of snow, a lot of ice, or a lot of rain, then I would suggest really considering some of the all-wheel drive competition, especially if you are checking out a Type S. There is so much power on the front axle that it's really, really easy to get things to slip and slide around and really easy to lose traction. And I'm not just talking about the road that I'm on here, which I do have to drive every day. I'm talking about regular paved road surfaces. It's easy to get carried away with the throttle because there's so much power, and then rather unfortunately, there's a whole lot less grip than you might want. Now let's take a deeper dive into the Integra's pricing and comparisons. Again, it's less expensive than most of the competition, but there are some things to keep in mind. That base price of $32,995 after the destination charge is going to get you the base trim with the CVT. The era of manual transmissions being the base transmission, that's long since gone. You have to pay a lot more for the manual transmission if you want one. That's going to be the A-Spec manual trim, $37,995. You can, of course, also get the CVT in that model if you'd rather. If you want the Type S with the manual transmission, that's of course the only way the Type S comes, that's $52,995, including destination for the base version. Now, I say base version, but really base and fully loaded are basically the same thing when we're talking about most Acura trims. You can choose your paint color, and there are a few other accessories that you can add from your dealer, etc., but essentially the trim levels come only one way. And that's quite different when we start taking a look at competitive pricing in this segment, because there is a huge variation between the base price of something like a Mercedes-Benz CLA and the most expensive CLA you can get, but also just something like the CLA 250, which gets pretty darn expensive in its own right. So as you can see, while there is some overlap in terms of pricing, keep in mind that no matter how you slice it, you're going to find a much more affordable product in the Integra, and you'll find considerably more standard equipment, because even on a $50,000 CLA 250, you're going to find that adaptive cruise control may not be on that $55,000 model that's on the dealer lot. So let's talk about that Mercedes-Benz CLA first, because this is by far the most expensive competitor that you can look at here. It starts at $44,350 including destination. So just the base model is considerably more expensive than the Integra. Now, I do think that the base version of the CLA 250 is more fun to drive. I like the dual clutch transmission considerably more than the CVT. We find a more premium interior with more premium finishes inside, but it's also $10,000 more expensive, 33% more expensive than that Integra. And a lot of those more premium finishes are not standard in the CLA, because if I were to just fully load a CLA up, you get up to $61,535, and that includes optional adaptive cruise control. And oddly enough, the local Mercedes dealer next to me has a CLA that is nearly fully loaded. It's $58,000 of MSRP, and for some reason, whoever configured that at the dealer did not check that one option box for adaptive cruise control. I just think that's absolutely bonkers on something that expensive. Also kind of weird, the side impact airbags in the rear of the CLA are also optional. So big thing to keep in mind with the German options is that by and large, I like them a bit more than the Integra, but you're going to pay an awful lot more for that improved feature content, the snazzier components inside, the all-wheel drive, etc. All of that is going to be a lot more expensive. However, the BMW 2 Series, I think that is a really good deal in this segment. The 228i does start more expensive. It starts at $38,400, including its destination charge. All-wheel drive is optional on the 228i, so base to base, we're talking a bit more apples to apples than some folks might think. However, you do have that option of all-wheel drive. And if we're talking about the Type S that I was driving, the BMW actually is a pretty decent deal, because the BMW M235i Grand Coupe starts at $48,300. That's actually less than the Type S. You get all-wheel drive standard on that model, and notably quicker 0 to 60, because we have all-wheel drive, because we have an automatic transmission. Now, not everybody out there is after an automatic. If you want to row your own, the Integra is the only way to go in this segment. But if you want to get 0 to 60 faster, and if you want better handling, you're going to find that on the BMW. I like the way the Integra feels out on the road better. I like the way that it handles better, but actual grip levels, by and large, are going to be better on the BMW, especially in inclement weather. And unfortunately, during my time with the Integra, it was raining an awful lot, and that just really highlights the fact that it doesn't have all-wheel drive, and that traction is definitely a bit of an issue if you get just a little bit too eager with that go pedal. Also a little tricky for the Type S, you can get a reasonably equipped M235i for less. So even though there are some features that you'll find standard on the Acura that are optional on the BMW, by the time you've added them to the BMW, it could still be a bit less expensive. Also tricky for the Integra, but in a little bit of a different vein, is the Audi S3. The S3, the A3, and the RS3 are all pretty decent deals in this segment, but I think that the best value is in the Audi S3. But let me start with the Audi A3 first. It starts at $37,490. If you want all-wheel drive, that's $39,490. So again, another case of all-wheel drive being available, but it being considerably more expensive than the Integra. The S3, however, it starts at $48,495. All-wheel drive is standard, as is a really well-done dual-clutch automatic transmission. It's the best dual clutch in this segment, in my opinion. Mercedes has refined theirs over time, but I still find it a little rough around the edges, and the automatic transmission that we find in the BMW just isn't as engaging as a really good dual-clutch transmission. That DCT is part of the reason that the S3 is so engaging to drive. And of course, if you wanted to dial things further up, you could get an RS3. That's $63,395. I love the RS3. It is absolutely fantastic, but it's also 10 grand more.
On the other hand, the S3, it does get more expensive than the Integra Type S, but you're going to get things in that S3 that you're not going to get in the Type S. You get a nicer interior, better interior finishes, you get all-wheel drive. There are a number of different performance upgrades that you can get on that Audi S3 as far as braking and handling. Audi offers more variation when it comes to paint color options and interior color options, etc. The S3 just gives you more of most things versus the Acura. It doesn't give you more power, but it does actually give you better performance, which is the interesting twist there. Now, if you're not willing to go German, and I could understand if you're an Acura shopper and you aren't, there is the trickiest competitor still to talk about, and that is the Acura TLX, because it's right there on the dealer lot. The interior is nicer, more premium. It's received a bit of a refresh for 2024, and with that refresh has come a bit more separation. Because when I first drove the Integra Type S, I thought, the TLX Type S, it's too close in terms of pricing. So Acura did fix that. They made the TLX Type S more expensive. They didn't lower the price of the Integra. So the TLX Type S is $58,195 now. So certainly more expensive than the Integra Type S. But I think it's worth it. Because for the average buyer, it's going to be about $100 or less depending on the type of loan you're pulling out on the Integra or the TLX as far as monthly finance costs goes. It's not going to be a huge cost difference, but you're going to get a significantly more premium product. It's not going to feel as tight and as nimble, but it is going to give you all-wheel drive, and you're going to get an automatic transmission, which a lot of folks in this segment are really after. There is a reason that the German offerings don't offer manual transmissions anymore, because the average customer doesn't actually want one. And I am kind of surprised in a way that Acura has made the Integra Type S manual only. The sales could be significantly better if only it had an automatic. And we do have an automatic that can handle this much power. It's the 10-speed automatic from Honda and Acura. Maybe it doesn't fit in the Integra. We don't exactly know, but at any rate, it's not offered in there. And of course, the TLX gives you the other thing that you can't get in the Integra, and that's the super handling all-wheel drive system. Not only does it send power to the rear, it has a torque vectoring axle, and it will send power across the rear axle. If my money were on the line, I have to admit that as much fun as the Integra is with that, absolutely bonkers amount of power on the front axle, I would probably get the TLX Type S over it. The V6 sounds more refined, it sounds better, it's quicker, it's more comfortable, we get bigger screens, we get an interior that I think is more fitting of the price tag as well. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comments section below. What I like most about the Integra is that the base models are such fantastic values, but by the time you get up to the Type S, it's kind of a question of Acura and the Integra staying in their lane. And where the Integra shines is in that base value proposition. The base model, the medium loaded trims, etc., they're incredibly good value. Fantastic fuel economy, roomy interior, big cargo area. It's an absolute no-brainer to get a mid-level or a base Integra over a base trim of the Mercedes, the BMW, or the Audi. It may not have the logo you want on the front, but it's going to be more reliable, more efficient, less expensive to keep around. But if we're talking about a performance machine, that's where things get a little bit tricky. Let me know what you think about that, and what would you pick down there in the comments section below. Do you have an Integra? Do you have a Type S? Have you driven one? Do you also think that it needs all-wheel drive? Or are you kind of happy with the bonkers amount of fun that you can have in a very powerful front-wheel drive vehicle? Let me know that. Find me over at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and of course, check out the merch store as well. See all of you later.